Hi, I'm Mike Harris, back with What in the Law podcast. And I'm going to talk a little bit about probation violations and what are some things you need to do to consider and why you might need help in such a situation. Well, you could be facing a probation violation essentially in a broad sense for two different reasons. One could be you did not do something you were supposed to do, and the second reason is you did do something you're not supposed to do. So let's try to make some sense of what that is and what might be involved. Well, the first kind is you did not do something you were required to do. For example, a judge orders you to do a various driving class, or domestic violence courses, or community service, or a whole number of other things the judge specifically tells you to do. That could also be not showing up to probation, or missing an appointment, or missing your analysis. Frankly, those type of cases are pretty hard to fight and usually impossible to fight. Because in those type of cases, all the judge wants to see is, did you provide proof of doing the condition you were supposed to do? If it's not showing up to probation, it's pretty easy for a probation officer just to walk into court and say you didn't show up. So what is there to do? Well, essentially, it's to try to mitigate the damage and make up for whatever mistakes there may have been. And depending on how serious this was and whether it's your first time in trouble or you've had a history, it could be very difficult to get you in a situation where the judge is going to be happy enough to not put you in jail, or it might be relatively easy. And there are some cases where you could frankly handle it without a lawyer. If it's just a matter of you didn't get proof of whatever you were supposed to do and you got the proof, bring it into court. But sometimes it can be more complicated, and that's where someone like me can look through the case, see if you need to get more time to get things fixed, see if there's any explanations that can be provided to try to get the prosecutor, probation officer, and ultimately the judge to be at least not so angry that they want to put you in jail. And very often we can avoid the probation violation altogether if you are in a situation where you got things fixed enough and they're willing to give you another chance. While this used to be something that was relatively difficult, things have gotten far more flexible in this matter recently because the courts have come to the realization that we can't simply be putting everyone who makes a mistake in jail. 10, 15 years ago, it was more difficult to get these second chances. Now it's not so hard. But you do have to take some initiative and get things fixed. And that's where someone like me can often help. Now, the second type of probation violation is where you did do something you should not have done. That could be because you committed another offense or allegedly committed another offense, or you just did something which by itself is not illegal, but is not allowed while on your probation. For example, if you were ordered not to drink alcohol and you were caught drinking alcohol. And there could be a whole other number of situations where there was some sort of restriction and you didn't follow something that the probation officer told you to do. Well, there are some cases of those that you can fight, especially if it's one of these things where you're accused of a whole new crime. If you're accused of a whole new crime, they basically have to be able to prove that whole new crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you can beat the new crime, you beat the probation violation. There are other types of situations, as I said, though, that are not necessarily a crime in and of themselves, but you weren't supposed to do. Whether or not you can fight that is just going to depend on the overall circumstances and how much evidence they have. If it's something like a positive urinalysis, those are often going to be difficult to fight because judges assume that the people who do the urinalysis testing know what they're doing and there's not a whole lot of mistakes. But if it's something more complicated, it might be something you can fight. But let's say it's not something you're really looking to fight. Just as we talked about with the other types of probation violations, you can often mitigate the damage by making up for some of the mistakes. And depending on what that is, again, depends on the severity of what you're accused of, severity of what the original offense was, whether you've had a history of this or not, and the overall circumstances of what happened. And we can often negotiate something that does not put you in jail for a probation violation. Of course, that completely depends on the circumstances, and we can't fight every case. And sometimes you might have a judge so angry because of the nature of the violation or your history that there might not be much you can do. But in the average case, in fact, the overwhelming majority of cases, there is a lot of room for negotiation and flexibility to keep the punishment to a minimum, or in some cases, get you another chance. So if you have probation violation, take it seriously, but don't give up. And give someone like me a call and talk about what you can do. Again, I'm Mike Harris at 719-635-2005, and I'll see you next time on What in the Law podcast.